Let me take you back to the 2022 season. Many storylines were brewing, like the Eagles looking incredible, the Chiefs offense flying as high as ever, but this little scrappy team from the NFC North was making a bit of a name for themselves for being quite the contender. Sitting at 10-3 though, they had just dropped a game to the Lions and needed a good bounce back win here against the Colts. But at halftime, things seemed like they couldn't have gone worse. 33-0. Just about everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and it looked like the Vikings were completely done. But in the second half, we would witness the greatest comeback of all time. But to fully understand why this comeback is so good, let me properly introduce these two teams. First, we'll look at the antagonists of the story, the Colts. Without a doubt, they were in the midst of a rebuild. Yes, they had some marquee wins, like when they beat the Chiefs in week 3, beat the Jaguars in week 6 after being shut out by them just 4 weeks prior. So sitting at 3-2-1 on week 6 after a week 1 tie against Houston, they would go on a bit of a slide, losing a 2-score game to Tennessee, a 1-point game to Washington, and then getting pub stomped by New England. They would have another solid win against the Raiders before losing by 1 point to the Eagles, a touchdown to the Steelers, and then once again getting their shit stomped into the dirt by Dallas as they limped their way into the bye week. So to recap, this is a scrappy team that some would say sometimes shows up in a big way to take down the stiffest of competition, but other times would let the most random teams absolutely steamroll them. They proved they could win some offensive games, like against the Jaguars, but they also could keep a low-score scrappy game in their favor, like the abysmal to watch 12-9 overtime win against the Broncos. Now, on the flip side of the coin, we had a very different story. The Vikings had come out the gate hot, and you knew exactly what their plan was every single week, and that was that they were going to try to outscore you. And you may think, well, duh, that's how you win a game of football, but no, I'm talking about it's a race to 30 points, and their defense did little in the way of aiding them in this race. Across their first 10 games, they would sit at 8-2, as the Cousins-led offense would carry their way through 8 of those games with some of the most exciting heroics possible. In fact, across their first 13 games, they would score more in the fourth quarter than they would in the first and third quarters combined. And of those 8 wins, they had in their first 10, only one of them would be by more than a touchdown. And while Vikings fans could continue to tune in for their weekly heart attack, there were some games in the mix that you never questioned what the outcome would be because the Vikings would simply implode. And it only happened twice to this point, but both times were dreadful. The first of which against the Eagles, that wasn't so obvious, but they would score only a single time in the second quarter, going into the half 7-24. It would end the same way though, as Cousins would throw 3 interceptions in the second half, as the Eagles would politely punt it back with a 3-score lead every time until the Vikings just eventually rolled over and died. But the Cowboys would be nowhere near as kind, as the only score they would give up was a first quarter field goal, and then literally punt every single drive of the game as the boys scored on will against the Vikings defense. So without a big surprise to anybody, if the Vikings looked really bad in the first half, they were probably going to lose the game. That even was a bit of a case against the Lions in week 14, where they came out to a slow start and got down 15 points at the start of the fourth quarter. And a little late game heroics happened as they attempted to pull off a comeback, but it wasn't enough to overcome a slow and painful first 3 quarters. So that's who the Vikings were. A team who liked a close game, but if it got out of reach, would just roll over and die. So enter December 17th, 2022, a game like no other. The Colts would get the ball first and lead a nice, long field goal drive to get on the board. The Vikings would get the ball back and throw a short pass, then do incompletions to set up the first punt of the game. But a bull rush across the long snapper would get him on his heels, and the outside support to his right side A-gap wasn't enough to stop that rush, as someone was able to reach right through and get their hand on the ball to tip it. And not just tip it, but turn that scoop into a score to put the Colts up 10-0 very quickly. But fret not. While it's bad, it's not insurmountable. The Vikings get the ball back, and immediately they're back to doing what they're doing as Dalvin Cook takes it to the left for 40 yards. Oh, they were so back. In fact, it worked so well, hey, we'll just hand it off to Dalvin Cook again, and he fumbles it. The Colts get the ball back, and a 7-play, 66-yard drive later, and the score was 17-0 in the first quarter, and things would not get much better from here. The Vikings knew they needed to get something to shake, but after only gaining 4 yards and 3 plays after an offsides penalty, they rolled the dice on 4th and 1 and got snake eyes. Cook was stuffed like a duck, giving the Colts the ball back already in field goal range despite only moving the ball 21 yards on their drive. That's all they need for McLaughlin to be laughing 3 more points onto the board to be up 20-0 at the start of the second. Then another 3 and out, and the Vikings' desperation led them to attempt a fake punt in which Ryan Wright would send the ball just a bit high over the head of his gunner, leaving it incomplete and giving the ball back once again at the 31-yard line, already in scoring range. And this time the Vikings defense would hold stout. They wouldn't give up a single yard, in fact. But it just wasn't enough to keep points off the board when you're already, once again, in field goal range, as McLaughlin put through another 3 points to make the game 23-0. Then the Vikings would punt again, the Colts would punt it back for the first time of the game, leading to the Vikings starting at their own 5-yard line, and after gaining about 7 yards on a 3rd and 3, Kirk would throw the ball a little bit outside for the easiest pick six you might ever see, as the Vikings continue to give balls away like a sign-up sheet for Unix school, leading to the score being 30-0. And after getting the ball back once again and not being able to get more than a single first down, they're forced to punt, where the Colts would take the opportunity to drive 65 yards before the half for another McLaughlin field goal to put them up 33-0 at halftime. Now, without a doubt, everybody, myself included, was like, oh, the game is simply over. The Vikings have already shown that if they're getting blown out in the first half this year, they would do a little in the way of correcting their course in the second half. But one little thing I failed to mention about the other two teams this happened to is that those defenses were actually good. Like, the Cowboys had the number 5 defense in the country at the time, and the Eagles had the 8th best. The Colts defense, however, sucked. And if you combine that with the fact that the Vikings love to play fourth quarter hero ball, we had something cooking here, especially if they could clean up all those little mistakes like the obvious run on 4th down situation, a fumble, blocked punt, interception touchdown, failed fake punt. That's a lot that went wrong in one half that you couldn't totally attribute to the opposing defense, meaning that their offense had a chance to get things back on track. So the ball gets kicked off, and it doesn't get back on track. They're forced to punt. But their defense holds tight and forces the punt back, where a huge 63-yard pass would put the Vikings in scoring range, where they would capitalize quickly to bring the score to 7-33. But the Colts wouldn't completely give up and roll over here. No, Flowers would take the kickoff out of the end zone to the 40-yard line, where they would only need a 21-yard drive to set up a McLaughlin field goal to keep a healthy 29-point lead, with the odds of the Colts winning at this moment still 99.6%, as Cousins would only have 19 minutes and 53 seconds to lead a 29-point comeback, which, that in a bubble, is still the second biggest comeback of all time. But here Kirk Cousins would go ballistic, slicing and dicing the Colts defense, driving 75 yards in just under 4 minutes, which was good, but still too slow for what they would need. And miraculously, on the other side of the ball, the Colts offense would seize up like a 2001 Corolla 20,000 miles past its last oil change, as across the next 6 drives, they would take exactly 8 minutes off the clock, including having 2 drives that used a whopping 24 seconds and 56 seconds. But the biggest failure in all of this is when the Vikings scored to bring themselves within a single score of the Colts. The Colts would begin to drive to put the game away with only 5 minutes left. They would pick up a successful first down, but then when they needed to be playing their best football of their lives, instead, the ball slips out, going back to the Vikings. The Colts are still heavily favored in this moment. After all, the Vikings would still have to score, and one thing I failed to mention is that Cousins had thrown an interception just a few minutes ago, so it's not like he was absolutely perfect to this point, and the lack of perfection would actually rear its head again. They pick up a first down, but 3 incompletions and a false start later led to 4th and 15, where Cousins would drop back and look and scramble and look again, but scramble further to only pick up a yard, giving the ball back, presumably ending the game, right? The Colts immediately pick up 11 yards and move the ball past midfield. The Vikings used all of their timeouts as they assumed that this was it, leading to a 4th down, game on the line. Matt Ryan would go under center and the push would begin. Short. He was short. The Vikings get the ball back, and a simple screen pass mixed with some terrible tackling attempts and Dalvin Cook's elite speed for a 64-yard touchdown pass in the most miraculous fashion. The Vikings were now just a 2-point conversion away from tying this game up. Utilizing a mismatch on a linebacker guarding a tight end, Hockenson was able to get good leverage, allowing for a hard guard to pass over the middle to complete the comeback. From here, we all knew how this game was going to end. The Vikings were going to win either the next time they got the ball or in overtime, which is exactly what happened. But it was amazing to watch. An uncharacteristic collapse in all phases in the first half of the game to come back out in the second half and take advantage of a team who went from trying to win to trying not to lose in a single second. A history-making day and just an amazing moment in football.
And the kick is good.